Hello and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview, where we take a look at the stories being covered in the current edition of the North Coast Journal. I'm your host, Dave Frank, and I'm joined this week by Thad Greenson, news editor, and Jennifer Fumiko-Cahill, arts and features editor at the North Coast Journal. Welcome, guys.
Hey, Dave. How you doing?
Oh, pretty good. Hopefully things are well with you guys, too. Enjoying some fine weather, summer-like weather we had recently.
Hanging in there. The wind brought a tree down in my backyard, though, yesterday.
Oh, not good.
A little bit of a surprise.
Nature, truly the worst.
Yeah, and the best of times and the worst of times. Speaking of that, let's find out, Thad, what is going on the cover this week of the North Coast Journal.
Yeah, this week we have a story by freelancer Lynette Mullen, who has written for us before and is a local writer and historian. And this story is entirely of her doing. She kind of came up with the idea of it while doing some historical research about Old Town Eureka. Stumbled upon just a lot of stories about Humboldt County's first opioid epidemic back in the late 1800s, and so pitched the story and then began researching it. And she was really struck, and I think it's really striking reading her work, just the parallels between what Humboldt County was facing then with the influx of first opium and then morphine into the local area, and what it's currently facing with heroin and fentanyl.
The article is amazing. I have to say that people definitely should check it out. Because it, like you said, the parallels are uncanny. But what I think is really neat is there are just a whole grip of historic examples of how widespread the opium dens were and how much it undermined social cohesion and people wrecked people's lives. Is there anything that stood out to you about that historic the insights about how we had a history here that maybe people really didn't know anything about?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple parallels that are just really striking in the story to me anyway. And one is, this, I think there's this propensity not just with drug epidemics, but with so much to blame social ills on outsiders, on the other, so to speak. And so in the late 1800s, it was Chinese immigrants largely that bore the brunt of this blame for having brought opium to Humboldt County and kind of spreading this quote unquote poison. And, today I think a lot of that is focused on South America and Mexico and border security. And when really, the pervasive issue underlying both of these is demand, not supply. And that's why we have a drug epidemic in this country, is because people, are either want to do drugs or desperately addicted to doing drugs. And we haven't, 150 years since this first became a huge issue here, we have not addressed those underlying problems. And so as long as that demand is there, the supply will come from somewhere. And then, I think a little bit similarly, I think there's huge parallels in the way kind of the greater society views drug epidemics and who they impact. And so the opium epidemic was not really an issue until it, started essentially affecting folks in higher society, doctors and lawyers and white people. And all of a sudden, when they started seeing that, it became a big issue, and then there was these governmental attempts to kind of crack down on it, and in very disparate ways. And so, for instance, opium dens that catered to or had white customers were cracked down harshly, while opium dens that were frequented by Chinese residents at the time were left alone. And I think today we see that in the response to fentanyl, where and with the rise of pharmaceuticals, heroin has been a huge issue in throughout America for a long time. But as soon as the proliferation of pharmaceutical opioids and fentanyl made that start reaching, kind of traditionally less affected communities, brought this hyper awareness to this epidemic.
So in addition to that sort of, for lack of a better term, racist otherization of a perceived source of the problem, which was really a projection, there was also an awareness, I think, that doctors were prescribing pain relief, physical pain relief, but that in fact there was there was a mental root cause that in fact now we know it could be attributed to traumas. I inadvertently mentioned moral because that was another projection. You're projecting moral weakness on people who are addicted when in fact there are underlying causes that could be addressed. So can you talk a little bit about that? How this article kind of speaks to it includes speaking with a doctor about sort of the medical conditions behind addiction.
Yeah, so we were really fortunate in the story to be able to work with Candy Stockton as a primary source. And Dr. Stockton has now been named the Humboldt County's next health officer. And she'll be stepping into that role next month. But she had a lot of really insightful things to say about both how kind of the conversation around these drugs was the same 150 years ago and how it's evolved some. And certainly, as you said, one of the things she talked about is our understanding of kind of the underlying and root causes of addiction have really changed. And while some people theorized about these things 150 years ago, now we have studies that quantify the impacts. And so certainly, childhood trauma, adverse childhood experiences, ACEs scores all play hugely into a community's rates of addiction and drug abuse. And we see that, that cycle playing out just with really painful clarity in Humboldt County. And one thing that's interesting to me is, it's present in those stories from 150 years ago, where you're talking about, parents struggling with addiction and children taken away from parents, only to then, catch headlines, decades later for committing crimes to feed their own addictions. And, that cyclical nature of trauma and addiction is very prevalent. But as Dr. Stockton explains in the story, we understand it a lot better now, and there are treatment models that are much different than they were. There's medically informed treatment models that actually, feature a weaning process of prescribed opioids over time that that lessen and lessen to help people break that cycle or break those addictions. Whereas 150 years ago, there's conversations about simply putting people in jail for a month to dry out as kind of the only intervention treatment available.
There's so much more in the article, but I think we should save some of it for folks. Any last thoughts? First of all, do a plug for some of the sidebars, but then in addition to that, any last thoughts about trying to get people to have a perception about ultimately what can be done. By that I mean there's a lot of information out there.
Yeah, I think I just really encourage people to read the entire story. It's well worth your time, and it will. I think it will change the way you look at addiction in Humboldt County, even if you think you have a pretty good handle on its present day incarnation. As to the sidebars, I'll just address them really quickly, but they're both fantastic. One is on landolum. I'm not exactly sure how to say it, but it's essentially was opium. It was a form of opium that was diluted in alcohol and used to treat a whole myriad of illnesses, and was the primary way that that folks in kind of higher society became hooked on opium, more than a century ago. And then the other sidebar, which I was fantastically interested in, is about the Emerald Gang, which was run by a gentleman from Arcata, and his top lieutenant, who I think was from Humboldt County as well, for sure, but became, according to newspaper accounts at the time, like one of the largest smuggling operations in the whole, like around the whole Pacific Ocean. And it's just kind of a wild account. One tiny spoiler of which is that the newspapers gave him incredible guff for apparently never giving anything back to his mom. So he was living this lavish lifestyle, funded by, opium smuggling, and his poor mom was still destitute in Humboldt County.
Well, that's great. Anything else you want to throw in about this week's edition to mention? Other topics you're covering this week?
Yeah, I have another story in this week about Haley Dolcini, who, if folks have missed the Women's College World Series this year, I encourage them to check out the article. I did not know anything about Haley until the annual college softball tournament that determines the national champion started last month. And I had the wonderful experience of getting to watch it in real time and kind of diving in a little bit late to the Haley Dolcini party. She is from Ferndale originally and pitched for 4 years at Fortuna High School, where she was utterly dominant. Like I don't understand how I didn't hear about her at the time, but she led the Fortuna Huskies to 4 consecutive league championships, won the MVP every year. So as a freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior, she struck out 1,100 batters while at Fortuna, which is just mind-boggling. Anyway, fast forward, she was now in her super senior season. So she's actually has graduated from college and is pursuing a master's degree, but with her last year of eligibility, pitched for the Texas Longhorns at the University of Texas, Austin. And they had kind of an up and down year and made the tournament as an unseeded team and made history as the only unseeded team ever to make the championship game or the championship series. They ended up falling a bit short to Oklahoma, which is a total powerhouse. But in the tournament, Haley just showed out and got all kinds of, national attention for her pitching performances. It was neat to watch.
And a couple quick shout outs with thanks. She's involved in raising funds for cancer, children with cancer, and also is an inspiration to people all across the country now. So any other thoughts to add? Obviously, people can check the article out, but just in support of what she's got going on next.
Yeah, so I guess 2 things that jumped out at me is, one is you're absolutely right. I mean, but just about the money she raised when in high school. College rules prohibited her from continuing once she was in college. But while in high school, she raised more than $10,000 for kids' cancer treatment and research. And simply because she and her family realized that she was having this incredible success and wanted to figure out a way to kind of give back and capitalize on that to help other people. And she had a couple classmates who had cancer at the time. And so she decided that was going to be her cause and started this K's for Cancer charity and pledge drives and all the stuff and raised a bunch of money and raised awareness locally. And then the last thing I want to push, and I hope folks read the article also, but is just how crazy it is that this young woman is 22 years old, has dedicated the last 14 years of her life entirely obsessively to mastering the sport. And, I asked her kind of what's next about like going overseas to play or pursuing, pro career, playing in the Olympics. And she basically said she's done and that her body is done. And she kind of sacrificed so much to get to this place physically that she just knows that it's time and she can't continue playing. And that's just a wild thing to confront at any age, I think, but especially 22 years old.
Yeah, it's a great story of hard work, dedication, commitment, love of the sport, and in fact, a former Olympian called her a legend. So she was created, quite the national buzz, and really, psyched to have been exposed to it. So thank you for sharing the story with us today.
My pleasure.
Jen, what is going on this week in the arts and features beat?
David, I am glad you asked, because we have a timely piece about birding, sort of, because it's kind of about Father's Day, which is coming up on Sunday. Don't forget. And because I'm never going to live that down, let me tell you. But Sarah Hobart has written a bunch of great stories for us about birding. But this piece she has about her dad is kind of, about her love of birding and how he instilled it in her from a young age. And she talks about how he took the family on adventures. There were a lot of canoes and things like that. But some of the lessons that he taught her about birding are really kind of like life lessons and just sort of enriching lessons for your life. Like, he taught her how to identify birds and like really instilled this sense of curiosity and keen observation. And even when she was sort of at the lowest point, the saddest point in her life, he really showed her she said, birds are always there. And, his influence and his inspiring her with a really, what seems like a very playful approach to being outdoors and learning about animals and learning about, birds in particular, really made it joyous for her. At one point, when she was in college, he saw, what is the name of that owl? There was this,
Northern hawk owl.
Northern hawk owl. No one instilled birding love in me. The northern hawk owl showed up, and there were a bunch of birders, just like we had a couple years ago, a bunch of birders kind of camped out and taking pictures and watching it. And so he called her, and she came home from college to come see this owl with him. And I love that he called her. I love that she came, but I especially love that he showed up with all the birders there every day with hot coffee and mice.
Yeah.
Like he was like, let's keep the bird around. And waste not, want not. So anyway, it's a great piece, and it's just a lovely memory, and it's also kind of inspiring to think about how you can, it's not too late. If you are a parent, you can still, I don't know, get a canoe or something and take your kids out and kind of let them enjoy it. It's not so much about knowing everything and imparting your knowledge to kids, but opening their eyes to the possibility of learning and of enjoying and really throwing themselves into enjoying nature. And, she suggests at the end that you go and like hit the marsh or something with your kids or with your dad or, whoever your father figure is right now. And and just enjoy some birding. It's lovely.
And there's a pitch in there for the Redwood Region Audubon Society.
That's right. If you look in our calendar, in fact, every week you will see all kinds of guided bird tours. And they're really great because they are, they're outdoor, they're social, they're distanced. You're getting somebody who is a volunteer who knows birds very well, who is going to teach you. It's like taking a one-day class with no test at the end.
It's very appealing, actually.
It is very appealing.
Well, cool. I think that's definitely worth checking out, and it's just the whole Father's Day theme. I think that it's very timely.
It is, and the other thing that we have going on in the back of the book is I got to interview a very interesting woman named Rochelle Burgess, who just hosted her first pop-up dinner event at Mad River Brewing. And she is from Brooklyn. And I actually just looked, and in fact, the restaurant that she was working in is in my old neighborhood, of all things. Oh, wow. Or it's just like, $150 more a month per rent from my neighborhood. And anyway, she has worked for a bunch of really prestigious chefs and in a bunch of prestigious restaurant kitchens in New York and in Brooklyn. Among them, I'm going to name drop only because these are sort of like personalities that we've seen on TV and whatnot. But Daniel Boulud, Francois Payard, Tom Colicchio, and Dale Talde have all been her bosses at one time or another. And she was a sous chef at Fort Defiance in Brooklyn. And but the thing that is sort of maybe a point of interest for us viewers at home is that she was on Chopped in 2017.
Right.
And when I asked her about it, she was laughing and she was like, "Oh my God, yes, I was on that." And it's hard to find, but if you dig it up, she's there with blue pigtails, cooking up a storm. But she said it was a wild experience and it was crazy cooking with cameras all over you. And anyway, but she ended up coming to Humboldt, as many of us do, with her spouse. And so her Humboldt-born spouse, William, I think he graduated from Arcata High. Anyway, during the pandemic, of course, restaurants shut down. She was out of work, and they decided to move to Humboldt County, where he's from. And after being here since, I think, September is when they got here, this past September, she started looking for work and found that there wasn't anything that really was going to get her creative needs met and her financial needs met. And she worked at a couple places, but eventually was like, you know what, I'm gonna do this on my own. And so she took the opportunity to kind of try doing a pop-up situation. Instead of trying to do a restaurant, a brick and mortar, which requires rent, investors, all kinds of kitchen upgrades and renovations probably, and then paying rent every month and not being sure if the pandemic makes a comeback. What do you do, right? Every part of the big, difficulty of restaurant managing in the past, couple of years has been paying rent when you have to be closed, or paying rent when people don't want to dine in. Can you survive on takeout? All those questions. So instead of doing that, she's doing a pop-up series. And the first one that she did at Mad River Brewing was called Hello Humboldt. And it was very much an introduction to Humboldt of, everything that she wants to do, everything she can do. And she grew up in Queens, and in a particular neighborhood in Queens that is extremely diverse. And she herself is born in Jamaica. And I think she immigrated when she was like 8 or 9 years old. And so she has a really varied food upbringing in terms of what was around her, what people in her neighborhood ate, and, what she became interested in as she went to culinary school. And so she's got a really broad range and interest in terms of flavor profiles and cooking techniques and things, which leads me, sidebar, she currently has a day job at St. Bernard's Academy, where she is cooking for the mostly Asian international students. And anyway, so she's doing that during the day, but then doing these pop-ups. And the pop-up, the way it works is there's like 2 big tables for like 15 people each. And you sit with, whoever you're dining with and whoever's next to you, right? It's a big communal setup. And then the courses come out, and this was a 5-course meal. And there are beer pairings at this one, which is interesting because beer pairings are a thing, but also interesting because Burgess herself does not drink. She's been sober for like 2.5 years. And so, and that's been something that's been coming up more and more people in the restaurant industry are going sober and kind of stepping back from what can be a very hard drinking, heavy alcohol usage culture in kitchens and in the dining world and in the service industry in general. So anyway, she was able to talk to the brewers and kind of use her background, everything she knows about cooking, ingredients, flavors, etc., to put together the pairings with the brewers and to kind of, make complementary choices, which is really nice. And then, she had this big day, this 1-day push for a big dinner for 30 people. And it turns out she loved it. It's like a crazy 13-hour day. And unlike in a restaurant where you're sending out orders as they come in and, cooking to order, it's more like cooking for like a big wedding in a way, like,
yeah,
except not terrible. I'm sorry. There are probably, lots of weddings where people are eating good food. And I'm sure I've seen lots of caterers and pictures of wonderful food at weddings in Humboldt in particular. But I always end up with the weird lumpy prime rib. Anyway, so she did this really grand dinner and with just a couple of helpers that she hired on for the night. And it seems to have been enough of a success that she's booking more in the future. And she really wants to do it again. And it allows her creative control, allows her not to waste food, because as you know, you might buy 50 plates worth of salmon and only 25 people order the salmon. What happens to the salmon? Mm-hmm. But with a ticketed event, you get to waste less and kind of plan more exactly. So I'm looking forward to the next one.
Well, I was thinking the same thing. Chef Rochelle Burgess, if you're out there, let us know. Make sure Jennifer knows how we can find you next time you do a pop-up. So, Jen, thank you so much. This was really great. We appreciate you and the 2 stories you presented to us today, and look forward to talking to you again next week.
See you next week, David.
North Coast Journal is available on newsstands now. Pick one up. Stay informed. Also available 24 hours a day online, so you can check them out anytime. Thad, Jen, it was great talking to you. And everyone out there, take care until we connect again next week. Bye, guys.